Connie. So
No, it's fine.
I'm Tracy Spence. I'm the enrollment management and communications director for Waiver. And so I've been with Waiver a couple of years. For those of you who don't know us, we are a independent nonprofit school serving the needs of kids, high school kids with who learn differently. So our population is mostly comprised of kids who are diagnosed and some undiagnosed, but but the diagnosis is dyslexia, ADHD. We have kids who need some executive functioning support. A lot of our kids have some anxiety because of past situations, and so we serve I would say a pretty wide variety of kids who are all unique, different, and have been thriving at the school. So it is like Connie had said, it's really a great environment. One thing I did want to mention, which for those of you who aren't familiar with us, we do draw from a pretty wide area, anywhere from, we do have some local families that are with us, but we're starting to see more families from the DC area, also south of Baltimore, south of Baltimore, south of Annapolis. On the Eastern Shore, we go from about Chestertown up to down to Cambridge. So it's a really it's a large radius that we draw from, and the families are we know how committed they are, because it's not easy for any of the families, but I think that's also a testimony to what we're doing at the school. So I didn't mean to interrupt. So Connie, can I introduce you too and tell them a little bit about your bio?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to read Connie's bio because it's so impressive and I don't want to mess it up. So Connie, so Dr. Simon earned her doctorate in special education from American University. She also has a master's in special education from Boston College and is a graduate of the Columbia Teachers College Reading and Writing Summer Institute. She has been associated with the Murray School, Charles E. Smith Jewish Day School, the Primary Day School, Sheridan School, and Berry Day School, which are all located within Washington, D.C. metropolitan region. She was also a field supervisor at the University of Maryland in College Park. She was she participated in training graduate and undergraduate students in special education. She is also the author of several articles on child-related topics, such as, including facing surgery with your child and carpool etiquette, and has contributed multiple chapters to Going Places with Children, which was published by Green Acres School, where she served on the board of trustees. So she's got a lot of really great background and a lot that she's going to share with us this evening. So Connie, just for those who have joined a little bit later, we're asking to please keep your video on. If you feel comfortable, please keep your audio on mute until you have a question. And Connie is really open to jumping in at any time if you have questions. So if something comes to the front of your mind, please let us know. You can also put things in chat if you don't feel comfortable with that. So without further ado, I think we are ready for the slide presentation. Okay.
Yeah.
Get my act together and I'll share that with everyone.
Okay. Implementing recommendations. Yeah, great. I think we've talked about that. The recommendations is what you really go to the evaluator for. You want to know, yes, you want to know why things are happening in school, but you want to know what you can do about it more. So the last thing we want is to have a great report that we put in the drawer. So my job today is to help you see the psychological in a more positive light and to turn it into a tool that you can use yourself for your child. Okay. So if anyone follows Nurse Kelsey on Twitter, or if you don't, I highly recommend that you do. She is very witty and down to earth. And what she had to say was, What if instead of relying on children to be resilient, we create a world that is less traumatic? And that says to me so much about what kids are facing today. Yes, they need to be resilient and have grit, which are the watchwords in education now. But we need to be sure to meet them where they are so that they're not always striving to be something else, someone else, and to meet some goal that isn't theirs or is just that much above their reach, because that's a horrible place to be. So I'm feeling like a step was brought and more. We're asking all of ourselves to do a whole lot that we can't necessarily do. And I was going to talk about this at the end, but I'm going to talk about it now. I want to bring to your attention this book. It's called 24/6, and it's written by a woman, Tiffany Shlain. Have any of you heard of her? It is a fabulous book. It is based on the premise that in Judaism, the Sabbath is a day off. They turn off, if you're very observant, you turn off your stove, you don't drive, you don't watch television, you get down to basics and you just interact with your family. And this book, 24/6, Tiffany Shlain is Orthodox and Jewish, suggests that in addition to that, we also turn off our devices for 1 day a week. And I really like that idea. It resonated with me because I feel that one reason the world is traumatic for kids is because I think we're all guilty of it, our constant need to be looking on our machines. And for kids, it's different. They're looking on Instagram and Spotify and TikTok. And I don't think they're on Facebook anymore, but I'm sure they have other substitutes for that and comparing themselves to other people all the time. And parents are doing that too, for their children or for themselves. So we're creating unrealistic expectations in a lot of big ways. And I like the idea of at least having a break from that 1 day a week. So let's just file that away in the back of our minds that we want to try to make life a little smoother and a little less stressful for kids. Okay. All right. What is a psychoeducational evaluation? I know a lot of you have had them, and I apologize if we're going over ground that you already know, but I thought this was a very good definition, and I'm going to read it and talk about certain parts of it as I go. A psychoeducational evaluation is a process by which a trained professional works with those involved in a child's learning. We want to be sure when we have a psychological done that the professional doing it is trained in this. I once worked at a school where the person that was referred to the most to complete evaluations was not a psychologist, was not trained to administer them, was a family counselor. Now, I'm sure she was an excellent family counselor, and she may have been an excellent evaluator, but there are specific skills and training and internships that go with giving an evaluation, and we want to be sure that the person that you have hired is trained in that respect. So it's okay to ask them. Don't be afraid of embarrassing them or embarrassing yourself. Find out how many they've given, just like you'd ask a doctor how many of these surgeries you've performed. Okay, they're involved with the child's, let's go back, Tracy, 1 second. Okay, thanks. With a child's learning or development to identify the strengths and weaknesses. The goal is to enhance everyone's ability to be as successful as possible. And to the extent that children are influenced by their home and their school, it used to be called the homeschool community when I was little, we want to be sure that everyone who's involved with the child wants them to be and has the tools to help them be as successful as they can be. And that term, identify strengths and weaknesses, really, in my book, though I couldn't change it because I'm quoting, it should be strengths and challenges, because I don't view any of us as having weaknesses. We just have differences. What I like to think of is that working through the strengths to improve the weaknesses. And the strengths are key. Our kids have a million brilliances in them. I do believe that everyone has a genius within them. And by doing a psychological evaluation, we have a chance to identify what that genius is, help them develop their genius, and then work on some of those other skills which are challenging. Okay, thank you. All right, why do we get an evaluation? So Laura, you said you'd had evaluations. Why did you get them? Were they going on at school more? And can you unmute, please? I do that all the time. You just press that little thing that has a.
Oh, here, never mind.
There, great, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah. So, it came out of, a lot of observation from her teachers, really, that she was we were getting a lot of blank stares, a lot of everything kind of moving too fast for the way that her brain was processing.
Mhm.
And so, we were lucky. I mean, we had a lot of really great, psychologists and counselors and everybody who just said that this is probably the way to go, just to see where she is, to be able to meet her where she is. And she's had 3, but we started when she was very young. She had her first one at 7 and then again at 9.5. And the one in high school was she just kind of broke down in the transition to high school completely and wouldn't get out of her closet, And so we were just in a situation where after the crisis was over, we just needed to find out where she was, to try to meet where she was, And I think that that's really it. Like, we just really wanted to see what she was capable of so that the level matched where she was. And we still struggle with it, to be honest with you. We still struggle with it because the biggest challenge by far is executive function. And it's a huge challenge for her. And it's become the primary thing that makes a lot of things difficult. So it was to get specifics on that and try to, take it apart and see what we could solve and what we couldn't solve.
So you did everything right. You did really a task analysis, which we're going to get to sooner anyway. But that is our point number 2. A psychoeducational evaluation can open the door to a broader understanding of their learning style and help point the way to solutions and success. And it usually is suggested by a teacher. Although according to the law, parents can request an evaluation themselves from the school. There are 2 kinds, one from a school, one from an outside professional. And it helps us find out how a child learns and what we can do to help them more. Okay, let's move on. So here's a cartoon I cut out of the New York Times. It's Peterson, may I go home? I can't assimilate any more data. And while that's supposed to be funny, it's true. And we've all had that experience. I mean, every time I go to purchase a car, I have to go back to the dealership a million times. Just today, I tried to buy Easter egg dye on Amazon, and I couldn't believe how many choices there were. I couldn't put them all in my mind till I finally said, I'm going to Giant. So that's how our kids feel. They have so much things coming to them. They can't pull it all together anymore. And good for this guy, because he is advocating for himself. So that's what your psycho-ed should let you know. What kind of learning style does your child have? And how can we help him with it? And my bet is that this young man would benefit from reading the book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, which is about the benefit of thinking slow. Has anyone read that? Great book.
I haven't read it, but I was reading a book that referenced it. So
Yes.
my husband has it.
Oh, it's not an easy book, but it is an excellent book. And it's written by, I wrote his name down here. Let me see if I can find it. Probably
I think it
not,
starts with
because I
a
want
K.
to. Starts with a K. He teaches at Princeton in the psychology department, but he won the Nobel Prize for economics.
Yes.
He talks about two kinds of ways of thinking. The fast way, which is kind of the instinct way, sort of the knee-jerk reaction, and some people can go with that, and they're very successful. Then he also, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, yeah, and he talks about thinking slow, which is about being logical and deliberating. And so in our society, we tend to reward people who are fast, and I think that's a mistake. This little guy, he can't assimilate it all, but if he gets it in pieces and he really considers all the pieces, I bet you he's going to have a better understanding than a lot of other people. So that's what we want to find out. It's one of the things we want to find out in an evaluation. Okay, thank you, Tracy. All right, so when we go in to have an evaluation, you ask the psychologist or the evaluator certain questions. One of the most important ones, which I didn't even write down on here, is you want to let them know why you're there. What is it you want to find out? So you want to know what kind of learner your child is. But you want to know sometimes some real nitty-gritty things, like why is he doing so badly in school? It's okay to ask that. I saw a little boy last night and his mom said to me, why is he so lazy? Now, he isn't lazy, but that's how it comes across. And if we always couch our terms, we're never going to get to the nitty gritty. So I suggest really letting people know what you want to know. You want to know why they're not getting better grades. We're embarrassed to ask that question. We're like, well, grades aren't so important. I just care that he loves learning. We do care about grades because we want to know what happens next for him. Why is he having trouble keeping friends? That's a huge one for middle and high schoolers. That's a real problem. Executive functioning. Why can't he keep track of his belongings or his assignments? As Laura said, this is really big. It doesn't seem so big early on when we're just saying, you know, don't forget your assignment, and we're running the poster to school or begging them to keep their raincoat close by. But it's a big one because it impacts so many areas of your life, not just in school, but in other areas too. And what's the best way to help? This got cut off a little bit by all of us, but what's the best way to help our child feel better about himself, feel better about school, his friendships, and move ahead, not stay stuck, but move ahead into a successful future after school? That's what we're all really looking for. Our goal is for them to be independent. And that's what an evaluation, all those little pieces can help us figure out, we hope. If they don't, go back and ask the evaluator for some more testing. Okay, what's next? Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, no.
So do you think that the evaluator would know how to answer that last question? Because that's really a tough one, because doesn't have to do anything to do with academics. You know, what's the best way to make him feel better?
It does and it doesn't, you know. Being able to master the components of academics, and I'm not even talking about the content, which obviously is important, but being able to master what school is asking us to do is one of the most important parts of being able to live an independent life. And as soon as they leave our home, whether it's for some kind of school or training or apprenticeship or whatever they do, they have to be able to handle their social relationships. They have to live up to the examples and the expectations of other people. And yes, I think an evaluator can answer that, because I think that if we give them those questions, they know that that's what they're really looking at. We're really trying to have a crystal ball, which we can't have, but we're really looking at the evaluation to point the way for the future for us, so we can help a child get there as positively as we can. So, Okay. Oh, no, not homework again. That gets to learning style. And that gets to the student who has executive functioning difficulties, which, as I said, is it's very prevalent today, and it's very critical. And I think one reason it is prevalent is because kids have a lot of activities. And so the schoolwork tends to come lower on the totem pole than it used to. But it's also prevalent because keeping track of everything is just a major task. Okay, recommend the psychological is written in two parts. One is recommendations for the teachers at school or tutors or other interventionists like OT or PT or coaches, their executive functioning coaches or study skills provider. And the other one is for parents, but the ones for teachers are broken down under separate headings according to subject area: reading, writing, executive functioning, and I'm sure math is on there too. I should have put it on there, but I don't really address math, to tell you the truth. So I don't have it there. But my biggest takeaway from this is do not be overwhelmed. Sometimes you can get an evaluation that is this thick. I've had 75-page evaluations that I have to look at and read and understand. And I'm not kidding. It takes me a week. I have to annotate in the margin, and I have to call the examiner a number of times and ask questions. There's jargon I don't understand. There are things that don't jive together. Sometimes it doesn't resonate with the child I know. So don't be overwhelmed by it. Take your time. There's no timetable on this. No one is grading you. And try to prioritize what resonates and what you think are the most important parts of these recommendations. You and the teacher know the child best, and always remember that. But do not be overwhelmed by the amount of information they're giving you. Try to sift through it. Okay, on the next slide, I have a picture of someone who's really overwhelmed. That is, oh, I know Ruth. Hi, Ruth. That is my granddaughter, but she is giving me a picture of what an evaluation can look like when you are faced with it. It can look just like this page that Livy has here, and Livy is 4. It can be almost untranslatable. And my suggestion is that if you have someone with whom you're very close, your spouse, a close friend, a friend who's a teacher, share the evaluation with them, ask someone to read it with you and discuss it with you before you go to the recommendation meeting. That's very important. Lots of times we go to the meetings and we do not have the written report in front of us. I do not find that helpful. I know that it takes a long time for psychologists to write up their report, but please try to get a copy of the report ahead of time and read it multiple times. I've been there. That's the other thing I wanted to share with you. I've been on both sides of the table as a professional and as a parent. I have 2 children and 1 bonus child, and they've all had multiple testings. And in the early days when I went, and even though I've read many, many of these, when I got the evaluation written down at the meeting, I was floored and overcome. At one point in time, I had to leave and make another appointment so I could go back, read this in detail, and then go back to the meeting and ask my questions. So don't let yourself be overwhelmed. You are in charge. You are the parent and you are paying the bill. Okay.
I wish that I could have had this meeting before I had my last evaluation, because really I went to the meeting and I was in a daze. It was a nightmare.
Yes.
And I just felt so overwhelmed, and I felt also just worried for my son and what are we going to do next? And it was very overwhelming.
That's right. That's why I wanted to talk on this topic. We are very vulnerable when it comes to our children. It doesn't matter what our standing in life is. Look, I read these every week as part of my job, and I've been working for many years. But when it came to my own child's evaluation, it was all I could do not to tear up and break down, because you are so fearful for them. But we don't have to feel that way. And we have to, if we can, look at the evaluation as a roadmap into their future that we're going to try to make better and brighter. And all too often, I think these meetings are focused on the deficits and not on the strengths. And we can listen if that's the evaluator's stance, then okay. But we can also go back, read it through a new lens, and then return and ask our pertinent questions. It's very helpful in meetings who can step back a bit and be a bit dispassionate about it, and then kind of debrief with you and help you figure out things you can do to help, and to check in with that person regularly. It shouldn't be a one-stop shop. It should be a process that goes on between you, the evaluator, your spouse, and sometimes, depending on the age and mindset, your child too. Okay, the recommendations for school and home are written under different topics. Now, we talked about how when you go to the psychologist or the evaluator in the very beginning, you tell them what your reason is for coming in for testing. And I should also mention that teachers often are asked to fill out questionnaires about what they're seeing too. So that gives the evaluator another idea of what the concerns are. But please be sure that when you go to your recommendation meeting, you can ask them if what they have found corresponds with the reasons that you sent your child for an evaluation. If not, then it's time to go back to the drawing board. You have things that you want answered, and they need to be addressed in the recommendation forms or in the recommendations. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but for your own peace of mind, if you get nothing else from that meeting, you want to know why your initial concerns were your initial concerns and what to do about it. Okay, moving on. All right, I mainly deal with literacy. It is my first real passion. And so I could have written a lot on here, but I restrained myself. The things that we hear today about reading instruction, and what I read the most in evaluations, is that students need to learn to read with a research-based, explicit, systematic method of instruction. And that is so, so important. When I went to school, which is longer ago than I will ever admit, we were told we don't really know how students learn to read. Some students just do, some students just don't. So when I became a teacher, I was like, well, what am I supposed to do here? And I did my best. But since then, we've developed many ways, and there is this move now towards the science of reading, or called SOR. There are a lot of meetings happening just this summer that I've signed up with, and they all have to do with having a research-based, explicit, systematic method. And that means that it's been field tested and that it follows a specific sequence of instruction. So we don't just go willy-nilly. We go in terms of an order of teaching that has been field tested, research-based, and we know this is a sequence that works well. We don't say that it's the only one or the best, but we know it works well. I brought a little thing here. I just pulled it off my bookcase so you can see. These are all the ways that we can teach these different sounds. It used to be that we hoped kids would just kind of figure that out on their own and assimilate it in their mind. A lot of kids don't. Some do, but a lot of kids don't. They need every one of those taught explicitly. And they need a lot of repetition, and they need what's called VAKT. It needs to be taught visually, auditorily, and kinesthetically, or hands-on. And nowadays, you know, we might even stick in technology there. And some, oh, I'm so sorry. And it's going to keep on. Hold on. Because my husband is at the Giant with my dog who barks, he's not here to answer. Gotta have some humor. Anyway, the person is just calling all the time. The methods that we most often use, and the granddaddy of all of them, is Orton Gillingham, written by Samuel Orton and Anna Gillingham many years ago. That is the Bible. The other methods of teaching reading, and there are more than these, are offshoots of that, and they're all good. Wilson reading system is very similar to it. The thing that it has going for it is it does have some books to go with it. Phonographics has no books to go with it, but you can easily find some. Barton Reading is something that I like a lot. It started out for homeschoolers. Orton Gillingham was originally for kids who are having difficulty. Now it's been taken up and it's used in whole classrooms. It can be used at any grade. It can help students at any grade, and it helps them not only decode, but it helps them to comprehend and understand what they're reading, which is a big piece of the reading. That is really the definition of reading, being able to understand meaning from the written word. So, are there any questions about that? We see that recommendation all over the place, and it's an important one, but it comes to be kind of taken for granted instead of really read thoughtfully and carefully. Nope. Okay, good. Oh, yes, here's one of my learners. Her name is Sally. She is with my husband at the Giant now. But she participates in the repetition part. And there you have her playing a sight word game. And I've a million games that I've made up and that I've purchased. You need to reinforce some of these lessons over and over, and you need to revisit lessons periodically, sometimes for many years. It takes a while for these things to set. And as long as we're on the subject of dogs, which I have brought up, I do believe very much in the comfort of some kind of warm animal or something while you're learning, especially if it's a little bit hard. Okay. All right, I love this. Students who are struggling gain more from explicit instruction than discovery learning. If they had discovered it, they wouldn't be struggling. And so we need very explicit instruction for these students. It is so true. Anita Archer has written a lot of books on this, and they're excellent. All right, now that's okay. Discovery learning was a fad a long time ago, and it still is happening. In some ways, if you've heard of leveled reading instruction was based on that, and it worked for some kids, but I really think that in order to be able to decode and understand, we need to be taught phonics explicitly. Here are some of the things we use for writing, and I didn't put it down here, but it's absolutely true. Writing needs to be taught explicitly too. One of the best methods I've found for that is called, it's by Judith Hochman, and it's called Writing Revolution, and she teaches it explicitly. I've taken some classes with her, they're excellent, but she also just has some workbooks that are good. So some of those, thank you. So some of these are some of the most common writing supports, but by no means is this comprehensive. Speech to text is a big one. It's also really helpful for kids who have dysgraphia, who have a lot of good ideas, but cannot get them out when they're writing. Because of that, I also highly recommend good typing instruction. There are a lot of them listed here. My favorite is Dance Mat, because I get a tremendous amount of buy-in from kids. We do a lot of dancing. And when we're dancing, we're learning to type, believe it or not. And I think anytime you can make something tedious fun, it's worth it. Grammarly is just one writing assistant. It will correct your grammar. It does a great job of doing that. Note-taking, I believe in getting permission from the teacher to either record the class if he, she is not opposed to that, or to borrow kids' notes. And if your student has the nerve to ask a teacher to designate one note taker each class, kids can have the benefit of some excellent notes. And finally, graphic organizers and writing templates, which there are millions of. I like the program called Step Up to Reading, but there are many, and they help kids organize, because we're not just talking about that hamburger thing or that main idea, 3 supporting sentences and a conclusion. Kids need to learn to write beyond that. And so we need to have organizers that help them learn to plan. That's the whole idea for when they need to write longer papers, expository writing, research papers, that kind of thing. Okay. The next one, I think, yeah, executive functioning. That is the key. And here's the thing about it. Everybody has their own system. It's hard to develop a system for all kids. We have to know the student first. Occasionally, it's even really successful. But a lot of times I feel like kids need to practice this and tell me what works and what doesn't work. And during the school year, they don't have time. So I don't know how effective they really are. One of the things that happens that really helps is having, you know, an Apple Watch or something like that to teach self-monitoring skills. Being able to estimate how long something's going to happen, how long something will take is very hard for our kids. Laminated checklists. I have those all over my house. And when my kids were little, I even had them on doors, you know, like, do you have your backpack? Do you have your sports gear? Remember to look for that jacket you lost, all those kinds of things. Hopefully by starting this earlier, it's going to become inculcated and kids are going to be having that internalized. But if not, they'll just keep writing checklists for the rest of their lives, and that won't be the end of the world. We talked about task analysis. That is so important. Task analysis is being able to break down a project into its teeniest parts and to know what we need to do to turn all those little parts into one big thing, sort of like fixing a bicycle or learning how to ride a bike. There's a lot more to it than we think. I remember the first time I made a turkey, it was terrible. I had no idea how to do it. I didn't know there were so many parts. How did I know it had to roast so long? Breaking assignments down for kids is important. Ask the teacher for a rubric or an outline. Find out what the grading is going to be for. Kids care about grades. They say they don't, but they do. Find out ahead of time. Ask for study and test guides so that they have a really good idea of what's going to be on the test. Invest in some study skills instruction, even though I just said I didn't think mine worked. I think that ongoing study skills instruction is good. I don't think that a boot camp is necessarily helpful. Invest in some noise canceling headphones. If your kids are distracted by noises, get them something with white noise. I studied in college with a huge hair dryer going all the time. But this may not be true for you, but it's true for some of my students. I have to be sure that when they have those headphones on, they're really canceling out the noise and not listening to a basketball game. It's very, very tempting. So, you know, we trust them, but we have to check because these things are very enticing and sometimes irresistible. Finally, ask for extended time for tests and ask if it can be administered in a quiet environment. Sometimes kids don't even need that, but knowing that they can have it is a great safety net for them. And sometimes they do need it, and then it's a good thing. Okay, what else do we have next?
Could I just say that the pieces related to executive functioning are so critical? And I would love to see teachers addressing this in classrooms consistently, because I had an opportunity to spend time working with some college students with ADHD and autism, and they struggled so much. So they were able to get accepted into University of Maryland, but many of them struggled because of the executive function pieces. That was so challenging for them. And a lot of them were just, they weren't graduating. They just were not able to get through. And I remember one student said to me, I know what to do, but I don't know when to do it. and I don't know how to get through it. And these were students who were engineering majors and math majors, so very, very bright with so much potential. But because this executive functioning piece is ignored and so inadequately addressed, we're seeing a lot of kids struggle and not reach their potential.
That is such a good point. When I taught at the University of Maryland, I taught all ages. I taught from sophomores through graduate students. It became obvious to me that I had to have each one of them keep a personal calendar. And I had to teach them not just to write on that calendar, like I'm going to someone's wedding this week, or I have to retest this day, but I had to estimate how much time it was going to take them to study and prepare, and where they were going to go to do that, and how they could work it in with their part-time job. You're absolutely right. And these were college level and graduate level kids, people. They weren't all kids, some were adults. They couldn't do it. I don't know what that is, but it was a skill that was really lacking. And I agree with you. We need to put more stress on that. It could almost be a class by itself, because they need some real tangible techniques that they go home and practice and then report on and then tweak for themselves, because we all have our own style. Yeah, it is a shame.
Are you familiar with the Cigna program at University of Maryland?
No, I'm not.
So that's a program, it's for, I think I can't remember what Cigna stands for. I always had a hard time remembering it, but it was for students who were neurodivergent. And a main focus of it was the social interaction skills as well as the executive function piece. It was such a big, big focus. And then also like the problem solving, the conflict resolution. And the students are oftentimes at that time with the program, the students were pretty much between 18 and 24, that they were struggling to be able to finish because of incompletes with classes. And so it's really sad, but there needs to be more diligent focus.
I agree. I'm writing that down. I'm going to look into it. Yeah.
Yeah. Kathy Dalberger runs that program over there. So
how do I spell her last name? Dalberger?
DOW and then hyphen BURGER. She's a speech language pathologist. And so it's a part of, it's in the hearing and speech clinic.
Oh, I see. Sounds like it needs more than to be in the hearing and speech. It could be widespread. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it does. It impacts social and emotional development too. It impacts a lot of things. Okay, here's my cartoon for this. This is where I come to unwind. We all need time to unwind. And by that, I don't mean organized sports, because that's another thing that kids have a lot of, but it's not necessarily stress-free. If anything, it ups the stress. So we all need to find something that relaxes us, reading a book, taking a walk, listening to music, but it has to be genuinely captivating, because the best kind of relaxation is where you completely lose yourself in something. And I think that's another thing that we almost have to teach ourselves to do, because we've become so used to this fast world that we need to really build in and let kids know that it is all right to do that. A book I highly recommend to you is the book called I Left My Homework in the Hamptons. It's about highly privileged, highly intelligent students from wealthy families who don't have a minute to themselves and have no idea how to use a minute they do have. And some of them meet with sorry ends. And we know that suicide is on the rise among adolescents since the pandemic began. So we need to really guard against this. What we see as not stressful, kids often interpret differently. We have only to look at that college scanner with Felicity Huffman, I think her name is, where they cared so much about their children getting into a certain school that they were willing to do unethical and illegal things. So we have to always balance everything. Yes, we want them to do well, but we also want them to be stress-free and happier. And of course, we perform better that way too. Okay, what else do we have? Oh yeah, for parents. Engage a tutor specifically trained in learning differences. I'm not blowing my own horn, but there are differences in teaching if you're tuned into that and if you're not. And that often comes with some kind of training in kids with learning differences. Doesn't have to be dramatic, and it doesn't have to be at specific places, but you need to be tuned into the fact that we need to address material kids who have learning differences sometimes in a different way. Sometimes we need to lessen the assignment. Sometimes we need to accept an oral exam versus a written exam. We have to be looking for someone who's tuned into that. Use of a tablet device to listen to recorded books while they're highlighting and note-taking. The library has fabulous things like this. There's something called Libby, if you're not aware of that app. It is a network of all the libraries in the area, and you can download for free a lot of excellent books. There's also Bookshare and Learning Ally, and then there's the old Kurzweil Reader, which I'm not crazy about, but it does give you textbooks to listen to. It's just that it's a very robotic voice. Enable your child to become a proficient typist. They need to feel confident that they can get everything down. I would go so far, and this is not going to be popular, but I don't think there's anything wrong with taking shorthand, because that goes really fast. And my prediction is that it will resurface for some of our kids. Okay, encourage participation in structured extracurricular activities. That might seem antithetical to working hard in school, but it isn't. It helps them organize their time, prioritize what's important, learn to work ahead, and get a good idea of what's going to take the longest. It also allows them to be an expert. And Mel Levine, who, if you're not familiar with him, he's been a little besmirched lately because he did some not such good things with other students. But his words are still wise, and he really strongly suggests that every child become an expert in something. And that goes along with my thought that every person has a genius in them. We just have to find what it is. So if one of those things is an extracurricular activity, great. It does not have to be sports. Kids can be good in a lot of things besides sports. They can be good in drama, they can be good in art, they can be good at being a peer counselor, they can be good in service learning. There are lots of good ways to become an expert. Consider a waiver for foreign language learning. Yes, it's very nice to be able to speak a language, but it's also, if you're not particularly suited for it, it gives you time to have tutoring in school. I do that a lot with kids. Also, there are other ways to complete the language requirement in college, such as learning American Sign Language, or technology of certain sorts can be a language. And finally, think really strongly about getting your child reevaluated within 3 years. And I think that's something that Laura said, because at different transition points for kids, we need to reassess them. We need to reassess them at the transition points to know where they are. We also need to reassess to make sure that what we've been doing is working. If it's not, then we have to go back to the drawing board. But we need to know that we're putting all this effort in for a reason. And your child needs to show that, both in his evaluation, in his performance evaluation, and sometimes in the other measures as well. Okay. What do we have next? Let's see. Oh yeah, the reading recommendations. I have a huge stack behind me. At the end of most psychologicals, there's a whole list of books that are recommended. And I really don't think many of us have an opportunity to read those books. One thing, these are a sampling of them that I took from numerous evaluations I've read. The watchword is that Overcoming Dyslexia by Sally Shaywitz and her husband. It's not just about dyslexia. It is about learning how to learn. It's very helpful. The other one I really like is Many Ways to Learn, A Kid's Guide to Ed.D by Judy Stern and her husband, Uzi Ben-Ami. And that is for students, but I recommend you do it with them or have a coach or somebody do it with them. But it helps them learn that they're not the only ones. There are other ways to learn, and the way they learn is not the wrong way. It's just another way. And there are a million others. One thing I do with a lot of parents that I see and that I recommend to you is that you think about starting a book club to read some of these, especially at a place like White Oak, which is a school that has kids who learn differently. So other people may be interested. You don't have to all read the book either. You can assign different chapters and read them one by one together. It doesn't have to be this book. There's some really good popular books on the market that sort of like historical fiction, expose you and educate you about different learning styles without feeling like it's overly scholastic or something that you really don't want to read. I know that Jodi Picoult has written a great book on autism. Excellent. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it gives you a good picture of how it feels, what it's like, what the family dynamics are like. So I recommend that, finding another way to read these books. Book clubs are one way. Another way is to listen to it on tape through Audible or borrow them from the library. I'm a huge proponent of the library. Or just read excerpts or listen to parts of it. Okay. And if anyone has any other books that they really highly recommend, please do let me know.
May I ask you
And-
again to repeat that? You, the book on autism, was it by Judy Peacock? What was the name?
Jodi Picoult. P-I-C.
I'm sorry.
Is that how you pronounce it? I'm not sure. P-I-C-C. I'm going to look it up on my phone. She writes all these books that are very pithy and good about various topics. She writes on very hard topics. She's written on teen suicide, all kinds of hard topics. It's Jodi Picoult. And she wrote an excellent one
Is it
on,
the one called House Rules?
yes,
Yeah, that was really good.
it is excellent. It lets you know that children with autism or adults with autism have certain things that are very important to them. And it's not that they're being obstinate or controversial or controlling. These things are truly important to them, and we have to respect them. Just like when we have a teenager at home, a certain outfit is very important to them. Or when my daughter came home with a pierced nose, it was very important to her. I had to accept it and realize that for her, it was important. It's not always easy, but we need to do that. Yeah, House Rules. Great. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
that one is really about sort of looking at the whole family dynamic as a
Mhm.
result of one child being diagnosed with autism. And she does tremendous research when she's writing her books. And they
Yes.
oftentimes involve, some type of a trial. And so the older son, I believe, in this family is high functioning autism, and he gets charged with a crime.
Yes.
So it's really quite interesting.
The other one that's good for that is Defending Jacob. It is the same thing. It's a student who is not a typical student. His father is a police officer and he is charged with a crime. I'm not going to give it away, but not only is it a great book, but we really see the ins and outs of the legal system and how it affects people who are different in some ways, and how police officers, etc., are not familiar enough with how to work with them and what characteristics to expect. I think that's improving, but I'm sure we have a long way to go.
Do you know the author for Defending Jacob?
No, but I'll Google it right now.
Sounds
I-
interesting.
It is. It's also a movie.
Yeah, I saw that on I don't know if it was on Netflix, but I saw it out here. I'm so grateful to be part of this group tonight because I have a 25-year-old who has autism, and executive functioning caused him to really not get a good high school education. Just, he's very, very intelligent. He just couldn't, settle down and, plan, and he just couldn't focus, get things
No.
done. It was really,
He really
really
couldn't.
sad.
And at that point in time, they don't want your intervention. And that makes it even harder. Okay, the name of the book is Defending Jacob, and it's by William Landay, Landay. And the other one that's fabulous, as long as I'm thinking about it, is The Dog in the Night. You have to read that because that is a mystery. But the young man in the book has learning challenges, and I don't want to give away too much, but he is a person with autism and he sees life differently. And it's wonderful. It's by Mark Haddon. And at the very beginning of the book, a murder occurs. And this young man knows who did it, but it wasn't him. But it sure does look like it's him throughout the book, and what happens to his family and to him.
Don't say anymore. Don't say anymore. Don't give it away. You're spoiling. It's a
This
spoiler.
is a great one. This is the first one to read. You can tell I'm passionate about reading. Okay, I won't say anymore.
I'm excited about reading it. I can't wait.
You're gonna like it.
Okay.
Okay, what's our next slide? Oh yeah, these are websites. I really love Reading Rockets. I think they put out something every single month, and it's always interesting and helpful because, kids with different styles of learning don't stay in little groups like this. They all overlap, so that even if you have executive functioning, you may have challenges in other areas. It might be social, it might be writing, it might be how to figure yourself into a group, all kinds of things. And I find that Reading Rockets is not just about reading, it's about all kinds of issues that, present themselves to kids who learn differently. Chad is another great one. It's for kids that are ADHD. And we know we have to put that H in there because of the law, but really it's for people with ADD and HD. Ed.D online is great. It gives you a lot of research. The International Dyslexia Association is fabulous. And understood.com deals with a lot of good topics. Now, there are a million other things out there, other websites. Just pick and choose. I get inundated with so many websites, and I can't read them all and I can't digest them all. I'm like the boy in the cartoon. So find some that really work for you. Pick and choose, dip into the other ones if you like, but learn from the ones that you want. Somebody wrote something in the chat about checklists. What was it? Was it?
Hi, yes.
Says,
It's an independent living skills checklist that we use predominantly for those soft skills, for those executive functioning skills. Again,
Yes.
It's a free tool that I hope helps. Yeah. And I was also going to write in the chat that Chad has some wonderful parent support groups as well.
They do. They do. There is nothing like meeting with another parent. That is true. And their conferences are outstanding. Okay, and the last one is my very favorite, and it is called Brilliantly Dyslexic. It's a book I just happened upon. It's written by a woman named Elizabeth Trudeau and her child, whose name is Quinn. I love it because it shows you the positive points of dyslexia, and not just dyslexia, but just being different in the way you learn. And I don't even like the way I said that. Just learning your own way. That's really what it's about. And what she does in there is it's to be read by kids. Now, if they're younger kids, someone needs to read it with them. They're older kids, they can read it by themselves, but I recommend that a parent read it too. And it highlights 22 people in there who are, some of them very well known, some not, who had rough starts to their childhood. And it tells you about the rough starts. One of the one that jumped out at me was Richard Branson. He had a terrible start in school. He couldn't read. Nobody expected anything of him. We all know he's a major entrepreneur. He's virgin this and virgin that. He bought the island of Lanai in Hawaii just so he could get married on it. He's quite a character, and he seems like a nice guy too. And all these people were interviewed by this woman and her daughter because there was nothing for the daughter to read about, or very little, when she was diagnosed with dyslexia. It talks about, I can't recall her name right now, but she was infinitely interested in science. She loved it. And all of her teachers would say to her, I don't think you can be an astronaut. I think maybe you need to try something else. Maybe you would like to be a librarian who specializes in science. She was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be an astronaut. She was African-American and she was not a high-performing student. So she was kind of out of the loop in certain ways, she felt. And her father believed in her. He took her by bus to library after library throughout the UK to educate her in science. She was fascinated by it. I won't tell you how it ends, but it has a really happy ending. And then the other person who jumped out at me was Margie. Her name is Margie, I had to write it down. Maggie Alterin Pocock, who was a young woman who had what are called language-based learning disabilities. She had a lot of problems in any kind of reading or writing. She doesn't go into how that turned out. We don't know if that got better for her or not. But what we do know is that she found out that she could express herself beautifully in art. And that's what she's become. She is a major artist. She sells the most beautiful paintings, and they are very expressive. They aren't all the same. They're all reflective of what is going on in her life with her feelings at that point in time. So there are all kinds of people in this book, and I highly recommend it. And of course, we know that there are many, many prominent people who are brilliant and who learn differently. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to the lab school in Washington, D.C., you walk in the main door, you turn left, and there's kind of what used to be the parlor, I guess, because it's a beautiful old home. And there are black and white photographs lining the walls of people like Albert Einstein, Gerald Ford, and the poor Fonz, who I think is no longer living. All these people who became very successful. They followed their passions, but they were dyslexic and had a lot of trouble in school. So that's how I want to end, because I think it's very hopeful. And my hope is that by having an evaluation, you'll find out a positive roadmap for your students, for your children. Any questions? Oh, you're very welcome. And Carmen, I think you sent me your checklist, which I have on my desk. I haven't gone through it completely, but thank you very much for doing that. Okay, you've been a great audience.
Thank you, everyone. And so I want to let you know that Connie's information is in chat. And thank you so much for joining us. And I hope I know this has been an inspirational presentation to me, and I hope it's done the same for you. Please, if you have any questions, please reach out to me or Connie, and we will get answers for you or lead you in the right directions, whatever you need.
And if
Thank you
wake
so
up in the
much.
middle of the, pardon me?
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very
It's really
welcome.
wonderful.
Thank you,
I wish
ladies.
you could do this